Welcome back. We're going to take a look in this final installment of this week's lesson at the Declaration of Independence itself. Now, we spent a lot of time looking at all of the dates and all of the series or train of abuses, as the Declaration of Independence says, that led up to its signing on the 4th of July, 1776. That's absolutely essential that we understand the background to it. It's absolutely essential that we understand the root cause of it in order to understand the document itself. Now, there's some simple things you should know about the Declaration. It was actually put together by a committee of 5 men, the leader of which was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, who we'll spend more time discussing in later lessons, was a brilliant young scholar who was very well read, very well educated, spoke several languages, was a bit of a scientist, an archaeologist, and an artist all wrapped in one. But when he put together the Declaration of Independence, even though he had the help of men like John Adams or men like Benjamin Franklin, for example, who were on the committee with him, this document really is his style. This document really is all of the ideas of the Founding Fathers, but put through the wonderfully literary pen of Thomas Jefferson. And so as you read it, and as you listen to me read it here in a moment, I want you to recognize just the beauty of it, but also follow the argument of it. Follow the whole purpose of it. Well, without further ado, let me go ahead and read to you the first 3 paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. They go like this. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the law of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. He starts out very clearly pointing out to us that this is for separation and that this is not a light matter. It has to be stated why they're doing this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. What's beautiful about this document is he makes it very clear that typically people don't do this. And you think about it, in our nation or in the nations of the world today, people don't typically rise up against a wrong because it's difficult, because it's risky. And so Jefferson points out that this is unusual, but he also especially points out that this was not something they took lightly. They were not simply eager revolutionaries who wanted to get rid of the king and get rid of the way that things had always been. They were reformers. They wanted things to return to those original rights that were guaranteed them by various English documents, going all the way back to things like the Magna Carta. As a result, though, of signing this Declaration of Independence, all of the signers risked their very lives. That's why Benjamin Franklin famously said, "We must all hang together," meaning we must all ally ourselves and work together towards this independence, or, he goes on, "surely we shall hang separately," meaning that they all understood when they signed this document, they were committing treason against the crown by throwing off the crown. They understood that they would be hunted down if the American states lost their plea for independence, and they would indeed be executed by hanging. But even so, I want to note a few lessons, a few trademarks of the Declaration of Independence that you need to write down, that you need to be mulling over and thinking through as you look back on this most famous of documents from our history. The first is that this was a public declaration of abuses. In other words, they looked at what King George had allowed the Parliament to do or had done himself that went against their own civil rights, that violated their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in some way or another, and they publicly and very specifically recorded those. The section we didn't read, but the section that you have read as a part of your assignment. In fact, if you go back and count them, you'll note there are 27 abuses that they list. 27 ways in which their rights, in which their authority, in which their sovereignty has been violated. And that's incredible. It's incredible that they were patient enough to allow those 27 abuses, which occurred over 11 years, going all the way back to 1765. Secondly, you have to remember the Declaration of Independence was a covenant lawsuit because the king was their covenant head. That was their relationship. He was their king, we were his people. But what they did in the Declaration was they recognized that because he has not been the rightful king, because he has abused his authority or allowed Parliament to abuse their authority, that he no longer justly holds that position. And so they brought a covenant lawsuit in which they said, you are no longer our covenant head. Third, one of the things the Declaration actually shows to us is that governments are made from people. Governments are not these mysterious organizations that are made of elite people who decide what everyone else should do. That may be the reality from time to time throughout history. In fact, it is the sad reality from time to time throughout history. But the principle is this: the governments are there to actually serve and to protect their own people. They're not there to exploit their people. They're not there to gather great resources or wealth off of their people. They're there simply to serve and protect, primarily to protect their people from crime and from foreign invasion. And so the Declaration recognizes that people actually make up these governments, and thus people have rights. It's the very basis of the sanctity of life, that individual lives matter. Fourth, the Declaration, going off of that previous points, shows that we have inalienable rights, that we actually have the right to life. And that actually is a given right to us. In fact, it's the very definition of us. We no longer are men and women when we lose our life. The Declaration also shows that we have the right to liberty. It is not right for someone to suddenly tell you where you must go if they have no authority over you. And if they do have authority over you, that authority always has limits upon it. And third, the Declaration shows that we have the right to the pursuit of happiness. Now, Jefferson kind of pinned it that way because it sounds better. But the Founding Fathers always saw that as property. And it wasn't as if they were equating happiness with property necessarily. It's the fact that they recognize that when a man owns something, it's an extension of who he is in some way or another. He earned that by his calling. He earned that by working, by the very sweat of his brow. And so when you take something from a man without his permission, you are stealing and you are violating his very character. And so that whole life, liberty, and property, these are principles you see in the Constitution and the Declaration. These are principles you see throughout the Scriptures. So what the Ten Commandments are there to protect in many ways. Fifth, it's very interesting how the Declaration was not a revolutionary document. It was reformational because they make it very clear towards the end of the Declaration that the Founding Fathers would call those of Parliament or those of Britain or the King himself, and so long as they were at war, they would be an enemy. But if there was peace, if independence was granted without a fight, then they were willing to call Parliament and all of Britain friends. In other words, the whole point of the Declaration was not to finally end the relationship. It was to restore it to a right purpose, or restore it to a right frame. Finally, what's incredible about the Declaration of Independence is they appeal to a supreme judge. They appeal to a supreme God. Now, the Founding Fathers didn't always agree on exactly who God was or how he manifested himself, But they all looked, interestingly enough, to the Christian God and to the scriptures for advice on how government should be structured. They had other resources as well. They looked at John Locke, for example, or they looked at Roman government quite heavily as well. But the scriptures were always a central and common element in the thinking of the founding fathers. That's why they also understand the whole idea of covenant, because they say that they mutually pledge to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. This whole concept that they're in this together. They're essentially under the supreme judge who will show what the just cause is, but they also are committed to that principle of justice so much that they're willing to risk everything that they have. That's the beauty and the incredible nature of the generation who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the document itself.